y'all hear me okay? Awesome. So good morning, everyone. We're still in morning. I am excited to be here. And this is my first time not being in the audience, but being on stage here at the Max. And I am completely in awe and honored to be invited. So thank you to both Penny Kemp and Benjamin Douglas for having me. And I'm just so thrilled to be in this conversation with you. And Penny mentioned some of my background, and I want this conversation just to be very conversational. One of the things that how I'm approaching it is we're very much sitting on the porch, what I'm sure you're used to doing, lots of over the course of your, time doing the work that you've done. So we'll get into it. How are you feeling this morning, Bill?
I'm feeling like I've died and gone to heaven. Somebody wrote a song, Ola Belle Reed, saying, I want my flowers now, not after I die. And this is the biggest bouquet I've ever had.
Oh, wow.
With you, Thabi, and with friends and family, my wife, Marcy. I feel like I'm home. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm home when I see they've given me a jug of buttermilk. I grew up on a farm.
I know that's not my
Well, my grandfather, when I was a child, would milk cows on the farm. He'd bring 5 gallons of milk up every day, and we would churn it and make buttermilk. And later, when I taught at Yale, and there were 3 of my former students here who were at Yale and took my classes, saw these films, and one of them, Bill Oppenheimer, backed up B.B. King with his keyboard when B.B. arrived with Lucille, but no backup. So, Bill, thank you. And I used to live in Calhoun College, and I would have my lunches there in the dining hall. And they knew who I was, and they'd have buttermilk on the table. So I know I'm home, and I can only say how much I admire what Penny and Benjamin and all the team have done here. It's like my life's dream. I've always been trying to connect pieces of Mississippi in my head, but here they've done it and a lot more. And right outside here, I was distracted coming in by my favorite musician, Bo Diddley. There he is with his quote. So it's everything I've ever aspired to see and so much more. And the next generation of Mississippi, the young people who are wandering through these halls and being inspired, will have a way to find their heart on the walls of this great institution. When those of us, all of us here, coming of age, we were struggling and looking for how do you find your heart in music and art and literature and food and puppetry like Jim Henson, growing up on Steel Bayou in Leland, being inspired by the frogs he would listen to at night to create Kermit the Frog. So we're all on that journey, and thanks to the Max, we have a highway through it all that is breathtaking. And Thabi has deep knowledge of both film and art and music, and the festival that you are about to unveil is a 3-year festival organized for 3 years by the National Folk Festival. And I helped organize a version of that at the Smithsonian in the 1970s. And the following year, it was brought to Jackson, but it hasn't happened since. The plan now, thanks to Thabi and her team, is that for the next 3 years, it will be organized by the national group, who will then turn it over to Mississippi. And the bridges that will build mirror the bridges that are built here at the Max between Black and white, Hispanic, all of the great families and traditions the state now has, many of which were not there when I did my work are going to be on display. And I will be back with our daughter, Virginia, to help introduce some of those. And I hope all of you will be able to come for at least part, if not the entire weekend. You will eat well, you'll listen to the amazing music, and it's going to bring people from all over the nation and all over Mississippi to Jackson for those 3 days, thanks to you, Thabi. So it's an incredible honor to be with you.
I don't even know how to follow that story. You are beyond eloquent with your words. But some of the things that you just said in that kind of short story that you shared about your journey across the years, as I took a deep dive into your work and learned more about how pivotal you've been and integral you've been to folk life and establishing what the meaning of that is for so many people, relationship and the meaning of relationship and nurturing relationships over time was a theme that came up. And I think that that's something that parallels for sure in my own journey as a filmmaker, but now taking this pivot into folk life and understanding how important relationship is, you know, when you're trying to establish trust and gain access in certain spaces. But can you talk a little bit about your work and how you've defined, how you understand Southern culture? I mean, for me, like here sitting on the porch with you is very much educational. So I know you're a wealth of knowledge, but just talk a little bit about how you understand Southern culture and kind of what the launching pad was for you as you figured out that that's what you wanted to capture and document over time. And so tell me a little bit about how you got started, because I'm curious as I'm on a similar journey at the beginning of understanding what folk life is, how it's defined, what to look for. And I'm a part of that next generation that will need to capture those traditions that get carried on. So talk a little bit about how you got started and what made you curious about folk life in Mississippi.
Well, that's a great question. And I tell all my students, some of whom are here, that you should follow your heart and not your parents or experts who think you should do this or that, be a doctor or a lawyer. I certainly didn't. I followed my heart, and I grew up on this farm I mentioned where my grandfather milked cows. And as a very young child, a lady named Mary Gordon would take me to a small black church on the farm, Rose Hill Church. And I learned at the age of 4 or 5 to sing the hymns, to appreciate the sermons. And I continued to go every first Sunday. And as I grew older, I realized there were no hymnals in that church. And that when those families were gone, the music would disappear. So I began to tape record and photograph and later film the services. And that led to a broader effort to record blues and basket making and quilt makers. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was following my heart. Nobody told me. And for years, I was doing that, and my father and mother and their friends thought, he will never hold down a job. You know, interviewing prison inmates and quilt makers and recording their voices, their stories. And over time, I was privileged to teach at Jackson State University, at Yale University, in Afro-American studies. I was the first white hired into that because I had been teaching at Jackson State, working with these wonderful families who were my teachers. I had teachers inside the classroom and outside. And I would always quote at the beginning of a class to my students an African proverb which says, when an old woman or man dies, a library burns to the ground. And you think of that. And the storytellers we all grow up with are our foundation. And Afro-American Studies at Yale, we had the first major in Afro-Am there in 1972 when I arrived. And I was put into that first class with 3 other faculty to teach. And it was a team-taught course about a field that I really didn't think of as a field. It was something I'd been doing. But I learned from the other 3 teachers and from the students. And then in 1979, I moved to the University of Mississippi as the first director of the Center for Study of Southern Culture. I didn't know anything about Southern culture. I was from the South, working on folklore. But again, I brought with me my experience at Yale, and we developed an interdisciplinary BA and then later MA, the first in the country. Again, with 4 faculty, myself being one, who taught the introductory course. And I arrived at Ole Miss, they didn't have anything like that. They said, how are we going to get any students? They'd never heard of this. So I took my guitar and I went around to the dormitories and I played a few songs and said, you need to come. And it started as whole cloth. And now with the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, there are Southern culture majors all over the South. UNC, University of North Carolina, University of South Carolina, Mississippi, Vanderbilt. But these fields, which are now officially recognized, came out of my heart and others like you and your work, which is, you're the next generation. And with film and the official festivals and this amazing museum, it's really like I died and went to heaven to be on here with you.
And I feel the same. You know, I was talking to John, I was talking to Benjamin about this being a very interesting moment, and it touches kind of on this journey of the conversation around the connection and relationships. So I met Benjamin years ago. So my background is in film. I went to school for film, minored in education. My parents were concerned as well because they thought I was majoring in computer science. But then I said, no, I'm going to do film. They're like, okay. So after school, after I graduated and came back to Mississippi, in 2008, I was a part of a filmmaking team that documented the first integrated prom that happened in Charleston, Mississippi in 2008. And so that's where Benjamin Douglas and I, who works here at the Max Museum, met, and who also invited me back into this conversation because he understands the importance of capturing Mississippi stories, but also putting it back in front of us in ways like this that are reflective and help us understand how important relationships are, but also telling these stories and passing of knowledge. It's just, this moment is so serendipitous for me because of your background as a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and expert in the field of folk life. And as I'm kind of transitioning out of filmmaking, before taking on the role of local festival manager for the National Folk Festival, I was with the Mississippi Film Office for 12 years. And so I was the economic developer for the film industry in Mississippi, but I'm transitioning out of that into folk life. So to sit here with you on this stage in this moment is like beyond anything that I could have tried to navigate or create on my own. It's really a divine moment in my mind. And so I'm, again, I won't ever, probably say I'm completely honored and in awe to be in this conversation. And I have to remember that there's an audience here, so that we don't go deep into too many rabbit holes. But there's just so much knowledge I want to soak up, in hearing you talk about the stories and even watching your films. I mean, one of the things that comes up for me is as I learn more about accessing rooms and accessing people and stories, that's one of the things that I'm curious about. Like, yes, you grew up on the farm. Yes, you were, you talked about Mary Gordon and, wanting to capture those stories because they would go away. But like over time, you had to do that over and over again. So tell me about what that process of gaining access to these intimate spaces with people were like, and then the process and trust that you had to build to document those, and for them to not be, sometimes people change when they're in front of a camera, right? And so for it not to be a performative thing, but this really intimate exchange and where they were being their authentic selves. So talk a little bit about your process when you were in these spaces. What was that exchange? How were you building trust? What did that look like?
Well,
what did that feel like? What did it sound like? What did it taste like? Yeah.
I'm 83 now, and when you look back on your career, you see all this mountain of stuff you've accumulated, recordings, films, and it all boils down to the story, which you eloquently talked about. And I remember when I was starting, I was talking to an old man in the area of Warren County where I grew up. He said, "What are you doing?" And I tried to describe it. And he said, "That stuff grows down here like weeds." And it's, my friend Renee Rosenfeld in Jackson had Mississippi weeds, which were cards of weeds on the side of the road that she would make into art. And so as I look back on it, the story is the driving force. It's the spine of persons, of institutions, of nations. And Marcy and I were talking with Benjamin and Penny yesterday about the future of the Max. And, the first 30 years, now the next 30. I mean, my thought was, why Mississippi? ? Why out of Mississippi, the poorest state in the nation, has come the richest body of art and music and literature? And Dorothy Abbott, our friend who I think may be here today, did 4 volumes of Mississippi writers, fiction, nonfiction, drama, and poetry. No other state could compile a shelf with that level of literature. Now, I would simply go hat in hand onto the front door of people like James Thomas in Leland, Mississippi, and knock on the door. And he was a Black blues singer, sculptor, storyteller, who was my teacher, who came to all my classes at Yale, at Jackson State, at the University of Mississippi. But I first met, I was asking around Leland, late 60s, are there any blues singers? Well, there's James Thomas. He's over in across the tracks there. So I knocked on the door, and his wife, Christine, came to the door, and she said, "What do you want?" White man at the door. And I said, "I'm looking for James Thomas." She said, "He doesn't live here." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry." And I turned around to leave, and she said, "What do you want with him?" And I said, "I'm writing a book on the blues, and I want to put him in it." And she said, "Well, you sit down. He'll be back in about half an hour." So I sat down, and his children immediately came out and held my hand and started talking to me and saying, "We want to be in the book too." And that led to, as long as he lived, he was my teacher. And I came back time after time to Leland, to Kent's Alley, where he played every Saturday night, a house party in the back room of Shelby Papa Jazz Brown's house. Papa Jazz had a story of his legacy. And I met what I call the blues family. They're related not by a literal kinship, but by a love for the music. And I would argue that all of us are part of that family. So my relationships were informal and mostly accidental. Somebody would say, well, there's a good basket maker you might want to talk to. Well, I would go there, and they would always take me in. And I think it's partly Mississippians are glad to see a stranger and to hear a story from outside, and especially to tell you their story. There's no one that doesn't, if you say, I'd like to talk to you about your life, you will happily, and I would too, start talking and tell that story. And I learned that you can ask the same question twice or 3 or 4 times about the same story and get a richer version with each telling. And so it's like going back to the well and priming it with, tell me again about your story. The Ray Lum mule trader and James Thomas, the blues singer. I recorded probably 50 hours of stories from both of them. Never got to the bottom of the well. So it was instinct, and if you have a good heart, they know it. And especially if you're white in the 60s, coming to the porch of a Black family, they knew that that was not done without an intent. And I would send photographs and I'd come back, those photographs would be on the walls. Send a book, and they would say, well, I loaned my book and it never was returned, send me a few more. Well, that was the highest praise, that a book on the blues was being read by the musicians and their families. So it was nothing that I had in mind. I was not taught that. I just did it from the heart.
And I think that what you're saying there and what I'm picking up on, there's the reciprocity and access, right? And there's a privilege in access, and you have to honor that access, right? And so one of my thoughts and questions to you was like, how did you show themselves reflected back? So you just answered that question even before I got to it of, I sent them pictures, I sent them books, and I saw them celebrate them, express joy, in those moments. And that's what was the rewarding thing for you. And that's also like, just to hear you talk about it, and it is very authentic, and it is from a place of heart, and you can feel that in the way that you talk about your work and tell these stories, and that the people that you engaged with were really like your friends. And it wasn't performative, it wasn't transactional, it was transformative, right? And that resonates with me. And it's very reflective, I think, of how I move in my journey and why I'm sitting here across from you now. I think because I move with heart. And actually, now that I think about it, my full name is Thabi Moyo. My father's from Zimbabwe. And the name Moyo means heart. So it's very interesting to sit here and think about hearing you tell, your story and how your heart is what led you kind of through and on the path that you're on. And to just make that little bit of a connection to the meaning for heart and literally in my name. And that is how I move in life. But again, they're not here. And I'm just so, again, in awe of the work that you have done and what you've captured over the years for us to be able to go back and engage with and take in and learn from. And that brings me kind of to this question around, like, you said part of it was you didn't know what you were doing. You were just being led by your heart. Is there a way to recognize when you're living and experiencing things that should be documented because they're the traditions that should be passed on to the next generation? Like, are you able to do that now because you've done it so much? And how do you translate that or teach someone else to do that? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
And the answer is you learn it by doing it. I mean, I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania in folklore, and they taught me classes on the history of the ballad. But when I got to the Delta, that was out the window. I mean, that had no relevance to going up on the front porch of James Thomas's home and trying to figure out how to get access. But it was so powerful. When I first met Papa Jazz, part of his right hand had been cut off in a sawmill accident. But he gave me a big shake with that hand. And then somebody, James Thomas, said, "You know what he just gave you?" I said, "No." He said, "A fistful of love." And it was powerful. But you learn by doing it. It's like swimming. You get in the water. And I had no idea, but I think in looking back, everything is important. People say you're always taking pictures. Well, now with a digital camera, you don't have to worry about paying for film and developing it. And so you can take a lot more, or film, or record. And a lot of the pictures you take, which you're not even aware of as a great picture, you can't see a great picture and take it. That picture may not really fit, but something that you took that you never really thought was a significant moment will be very powerful. And there's a phrase, by indirection, direction find. A lot of the photographs or film that you do take may end up that you thought were not very important. They were throwaways. 50 years from now, maybe it won't even be you, but you document things and capture them either at your family's dining room table or on the road. You capture those and they become a part of an archive of memory. And you really, there's no way to say other than follow your heart. You want to go work on the Gulf Coast, or you want to work in Meridian or in the Mississippi Hills, and knock on doors. And those are your teachers. And you will find your way into deep, heartfelt stories that no one else has bothered to listen to. And you will learn, and they will be affirmed. And these are voices that will disappear. All of our voices at some point disappear. But if they are recorded, you honor them. And this was the civil rights movement in the 60s, which I was involved in. But I felt my work in folklore was a political act to document the Black faces of men and women, to record their voices, to film their worlds, which otherwise would have been invisible. And invisibility has a special meaning in the Black community because, and today we're trying to bring it back in terms of what many people want to do, but to erase history. But visibility through the photograph, you capture a portrait of Papa Jazz, and he's long gone, but there is that magnificent face and the voice and the picture of him speaking on film. You can do that with your parents and grandparents. It's like putting fine wine in a jug, and then you pass it on generation to generation. And it's even more valuable if you've recorded your grandparents and then you pass it to your grandchildren. How many of our families are blessed to have that? But we live in a moment where the story and folklore are essential to understanding both our past and our future. And that's why the Max is so important, because it's a complicated story. Why Mississippi? But you walk through these rooms, spend a day or however long you have. At the end of that, you see a story, and it's a beautiful story that is being celebrated here with these photos and many more. And as a folklorist and a filmmaker, that's what we do. And to the degree that it, is seen by others, you're passing on the torch of memory of people, all of whom, whether you like them or disagree with them, they're human beings. And you embrace them and say, you're important. We want to pass your story on to the future for the sake of Mississippi, of our nation, and the world, because the world knows Mississippi. I mean, these people on the walls are globally known. We did a symposium on Elvis Presley, and it was said that his image, you could draw a sketch of a sideburn everywhere from China to Africa to Asia to Russia. They'll know who that is.
That's hilarious.
They know who B.B. King is. They know Faulkner. They know Richard Wright. And so we think we're dealing with weeds that grow locally, but people have made those weeds globally loved. And that's kind of my inspiration in coming here, is to see it all in one big envelope.
Yeah, and I have so many questions in this one thought, but the last thing that you just said about like the export of like these exports of arts and culture that Mississippi have sent out into the world, you know, is the thing that makes us so unique and special. And that makes me also think about the National Folk Festival coming to Mississippi. So it's the world now is coming back to Mississippi to show off, but Mississippi, really, the world is coming so Mississippi can show off here on our, you know, like our own kind of land. And I just am so excited to see that exchange, the cultural exchanges that happen because of how the folk festival format is. And, you know, 6 stages, 3 days, all free in downtown Jackson, November 7th through the 9th. And I think there's some materials here if you're interested in learning more. Shameless plug. But really, it does connect to what you're just saying about, you know, how our art and culture is celebrated. One random question that popped up in my brain. I'm curious, I want to do something really quick, kind of off script. I want you to, do you have your phone with you?
I do.
Can you tell, let's do a little thing. How many photos do you have in your phone right now?
Well,
and everybody could do this if you want to.
I use it all the time, but
yeah.
I don't know how to use it.
I can tell you how many. It tells you right in the
That's what
top
I was going
corner.
to ask you.
Yeah, so he has 82,000 photos. I have 111,000 photos in my phone. Okay, anybody else in the audience who's looking? How many photos? I see you looking. How many photos you got, John? Top left corner. 16,000. But I think that speaks to something. I think that and yell it out when you have it. If you find your number, John. 36,000. Wow. 44. So that is that not Myrna? Hi. 14,000. But so let's talk a little bit about that, right? Let's talk a little bit about the photos that, because we all are capturing clearly like these moments, these special moments. But then what does it look like on the other side of that when we are trying to share out and not necessarily figure out the moments, but like, why is it important for me not to keep all of 100,000 of these photos just to me? And how do I archive them or share them out in a way that I know will transcend time? Because I think that that's the thing that Ben and I were talking about when it comes to things that are passed down as traditions and stay, you know, preserved. They transcend time. So talk a little bit about that moment that we just had and how it relates to this idea of archiving, sharing out, you know, moments that could be looked at 40, 50 years from now. Like, what comes up for you as that moment just unfolded?
Well, when I went to the National Endowment for the Humanities as chairman in 1997, it was kind of overwhelming. It's a big agency, gave away $180 million a year. And they wanted to know what my initiatives would be. Well, one was a project called My History is America's History. It's a beautiful little paperback book that I think is still available, but it was put all over the nation through the state humanities councils. And it did just what you're asking about. It said, no matter who you are, you're part of American history, and you should preserve that. Now, let's say you've got photographs, you've got quilts, you've got recordings, whatever you have that helps preserve your history, you should think about putting those in a local library or an archive or somehow preserving them. And now we're in a digital age.
Exactly. That was another thought.
Our daughter, who's a librarian, who'll be with me at the festival, in her library studies at UNC, they have two tracks. There's the traditional paper, but then there's what they call born digital. Now, these 82,000 on this phone are part. Every time I get rid of a phone, I transfer all that into my archive at UNC. And so I don't know how many are there, but it's large. But when I finished my work, or was moving from analog film, the old film, to digital, I probably have maybe 50,000. And another comparison is I did a few years ago a MOOC course, massive online open course. If any of you are interested, it's free. You Google my name and the American South and MOOC, and you'll find an 8-week class. You can take it all at once, but I tell people, if you take that, you know everything I know. But it goes through music, literature, architecture, art, photographs, and you can look at how many students have taken it. I looked at it the other day. 76,000 students have taken that course. Wow. And many of them will write me from all over the world. Now, my entire career, 50 plus years of teaching, I didn't teach anything close to that number. So we are in a new generation, and I'm kind of looking back and struggling to use my phone. We had a hard time getting to the 3-foot hotel with my directions and Marcy driving. Marcy was impatient with me. She said, "You never know how to do this." And I don't. I get nervous and I'm all thumbs. But Marcy is good and our daughter is super good. So you understand what I'm saying, but the importance, and I tell students that you take those photographs and get an external hard drive where you can have a different place if you lose your phone, or put them on the cloud, whatever. I'm not a good person to answer that question because I don't know. It's changing so quickly, but it's changing in favor of the ability to do the documentation of the story, the photograph, the film. And it opens the door for, young Steven Spielbergs who want to be a filmmaker. If you've got the phone, you are a filmmaker, and you can edit and do all those complicated worlds. I have 61 hours of footage I shot in my Black folklore course at Yale. And along with field work, they shot my lectures, which some of my guests were in that course. Then we shot interviews and concerts by B.B. King. We brought the crew to Mississippi, shot in the Delta for a week in Parchman and churches. And we cut 4 20-minute films, which is what inspired this program. But there's a lot of untouched, unseen material. And we have digitized the film and the sound. And now, with the knock on wood, the Ford Foundation has indicated they want to help finish it. So we will sync the sound and edit the films. Again, that world, I feel like I want to listen to young people and I'm working with young filmmakers, black and white, as advisors. And we're thinking about bringing 6 or 8 young and old filmmakers, from Sam Pollard, who grew up in Macon, Mississippi. He's the dean of documentary film and Black history, to young filmmakers and say, here it is, go in and make a half-hour film, all 6 of you. And then we'll have 6 films by amazing directors, one on blues, one on religion, one on prison lore, whatever. And then those films could come to the Max with the filmmakers. They could come to the Mississippi Museum of Art, to the Met Museum, to the African American Museum on the Mall. They could go all over the country, and what they represent is the vitality of an archive. And my archive, which dates back to the 60s, I've done what little I could through the books and films I've done, but it's online. It's digitally online through the UNC library. And all sorts of young Black filmmakers and musicians are using it. Jay-Z used my little short film on Parchman Penitentiary in a film he's done on Parchman. Beyoncé used a portrait I did of Bobby Rush in her Country Carter concert as a backdrop. Raven Jackson, a young Black filmmaker whose mother grew up in Mississippi, finished a film degree at New York University and wanted to do a film on her mother's life. She was closely rooted in a Black church in Crystal Springs, which is not there anymore. But she saw the photograph of Rose Hill, where I grew up, in a book I did called The South in Color. And she called me and she said, "Is that church still there?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Would it be possible to come look at it as a location to film?" I said, "Of course." She came down with her producer. They ended up shooting the entire film. All dirt roads taste like salt. And it's won every award, from Sundance to New York, all the festivals. And she's now has a Guggenheim Fellowship. But that little photograph was, and that's happening almost every week or month. People are writing me saying, "Can we use this? Can we use that?" Of course you can. And then you see how it has a life of its own. And these 4 films that we did at Yale have inspired this 2-month program here. They're also online through a project that we will send you if we have your email. You can watch all 4 films and interviews about each film with Chuck Reese, who is one of the founders of the Bitter South, a group in Atlanta. But all that is to say that those photographs on your phone, they have meaning to you, but if they're in an archive where the public can view them and there's information that leads them there, all you have to say is Mississippi. Then you say Rose Hill Church or blues. If they're looking for these topics, they will find them. And they come to you and say, "We would like permission to use this photograph." So this work it's important to each of us when we do it, but we don't appreciate the fact that there are many others who will come for different reasons and find inspiration in the work that each of you does and makes available in the ways that are now possible.
No, thank you for that nugget and lesson, really, on what to do with the photos, you know what I mean? That gives us a path. And I think that's one of the things that, questions I get from even my mom. It's just like, how do I save my photos? What do I do with the photos? And so now I just say thank you on behalf of everyone. You gave us a path of what to do and how to share out. And one of the things that I was thinking about earlier on like my first page of notes, how often do you turn the camera around on yourself, right? And what do moments like that look like? How important is it to do that as you've been on this journey so that what your thought process and your approach to the work is captured and also shared out? How often do you turn it on yourself?
Well, literally, when we talk about documentary film, there's kind of an illusion that documentary is more objective because you're not in it, but you are. If I take this portrait of John in the front row here, and as I did outside, I filmed him while he was talking about a book that I have he just inscribed. I'm in that film, and he is responding to me in a way that is felt. And when you take a photograph, in film, there's a long shot, medium, and close shot. Long, medium, and tight. And when you get tight on the face, I love those portraits, and do it with a vertical, people are uncomfortable, and you capture a kind of expression that's much more interesting than a distant shot. But you're not literally in it, but you are being reflected in what is happening. But I also, because if you're honest, you have to show that you're there. And often I'll photograph my shadow so people know and Eudora Welty did this down in those ruins near Port Gibson. She took a picture of these columns, and you see her shadow with the camera. And then you can do what they call, I forget what they call it, but you punch something in your phone and it will photograph you with people.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that program.
And
knows it, yeah.
There is also the mirror. If there's a mirror in the room, you're photographing the room and you photograph your image there. So then you talk about it. You talk about and write about what was it like and what were the experiences, and you kind of give the context of how you enter a community, gain their trust, and then develop what the photographs and the films are, and share that back with the community. Now, I'm in touch with a number of James Thomas's children and grandchildren, and they're in Leland, they're in Chicago, they're in Georgia, and they are very sophisticated about technology. And one grandchild said, I saw my grandfather on the internet in your film, and I want to know more about all this. Well, that's wonderful. And who could imagine when that was done in the 60s, that it would lead, and these kids, they're adults probably now, but they have their own websites. The sophistication of technology is global, and in the family in which you worked, I often am connected to generations away from the people with whom I worked. And sometimes I'll photograph people that were wandering through, and I don't know who they are. I couldn't get their names. But they will reach out to me 20 years, 30 years later and say, that's a picture of my cousin or my neighbor. This is their name, and so on. So once you start this, it's like an extended family. And in the case of James Thomas and Ray Lum and others, I have extensive correspondence with them, and I would publish that in my books. Mr. Lum was not a great writer. He could talk and auction mules and horses. You couldn't begin to compare with him. James Thomas writes, he would have someone write the letters for him, his daughter, early, and then he would put an X down there. So he couldn't write a letter. but he would dictate it. But he could play the blues better than anyone. And we have former students here who attest to it because they heard him at Yale and in other places. So you have this relationship that is lifelong. As long as they and you are living, you're going to hear from them. And often in very intimate ways, they'll tell you what's happening in their life and what they're hoping to do or can't do or did do. So technology it's here to stay, and we want to harness it in the way that I use tape recorders and film.
A number of things continue to come up to think about the conversation we're in, and I know we won't be able to touch on it all, but one of the things that you said that I noticed when I was watching the work, the 4 films, how you used the extreme close-ups. Maybe that's me as a filmmaker, and it would, and in those moments of extreme, when you chose to use that type of shot, what I picked up on, because you would hold on a person for a while, like you would be extremely close for like maybe even up to a minute. It's maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And what I captured in that was vulnerability. Like you could literally feel a shift, and you felt that person. Like I don't know, you didn't necessarily move in, maybe you zoomed in, but the vulnerability that you can capture, creatively capture, with choice of shot. I think you did that beautifully in a lot of your films, and I really felt like that energy exchange with that subject matter, even though it was years ago. I still felt that rawness and that vulnerability in that moment. And I think it was the first one of the films that I watched as I want to say As I Lay Dying. I know that's not the name of the film, but what's the name of are they up here?
I Ain't Lying.
No, it's not I Ain't Lying. It's the one.
Give My Poor Heart Ease.
Give My Poor Heart Ease.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I noticed it first. But it was your choice of, how you framed your shots that definitely stood out to me. So I think that that's interesting, as you talked about when you were, capturing John and, what you were capturing, how long you stayed on the subject. And then you do it very quietly, you know what I mean? You're just kind of quiet about when you capture and how you capture. And I think that's something also to note is that I think reflects in my work. Sometimes I don't say anything about what I'm capturing. I just capture it because it moves me too. When I think about driving through Mississippi, a lot of times I'll stop and pull off on the side of the road because I want to capture something that just spoke to me. And I don't know why it spoke to me, but I'm like, something says stop, so stop. Take this picture, take it in. I don't know, where it will be used, when it will be used, but in this conversation, it makes a lot more sense to lean into that. And so that's just what's coming up for me as we're in conversation, and I wanted to share that out. Not necessarily a question, but just more an exchange and appreciation for, again, the life that you live and how you tell your stories. They're so rich and textured and full, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I just, giving your flowers in this moment.
What you're saying really resonates with me. When you stop on the side of the road and take that picture, you never want to leave or pass by what you think, well, I'll come back and get it another day. It won't be there.
No, the lighting won't be the same. Nothing will be the same.
The lighting won't be the same. The sunset resonates a deeper color. Light and texture and the actual object may not be there. So you want to take, and now you can take it without worrying about expense. You want to take every photograph that you feel has meaning. And often I'll be in a situation where lots going on, but I just, in my gut, I don't feel like I want to take a single picture. And then I'm in places, and this is one of them, where I want to just photograph without stopping. I mean, there's so many things, but the portrait, and I think of Walker Evans' portraits of the families in rural in Alabama, Hale County, that are some of the greatest photographs ever taken. And when you're in a quiet moment with B.B. King or James Thomas, and they are reflecting on their music, and you've been in a juke joint or traveling down the highway, been in very busy, sort of large screen moments, and then you go to a quiet moment, and there's an inmate at Parchman Penitentiary who describes that, and we're tight on him. And he said, you know, he's very matter of fact. He said, I've been here a long time, and I shine shoes, and I get 25 cents, pick up a little money, and I buy some cigarettes, and I'm getting along pretty well. He said, my wife's left me. She left me after I came here. I'm doing okay. Just breaks your heart.
It does. That's exactly the moment.
Yeah.
That's exactly the moment that I was thinking about. And there's another one that happened when you were with the blues.
Well, and the other thing is you can intercut. You know, a lot of this was shot at Yale when James Thomas and B.B. were there. And I lived in a little apartment. I was a resident fellow in Calhoun College. And James Thomas always stayed in the guest suite when he came. So we were filming him on the couch in my apartment. I had students all around him. And we were shooting a tight shot of him. He said, the blues is all about women. He said, I came home from work one day and a little boy comes up to me. He says, your wife's done left you.
I remember that.
He said, I know it, boy. Get on away from here. He didn't know it. And he says, she took all her clothes with her. He said, I know it. Well, that broke his heart. But he tells it, and we segue that into shots in Leland, where he's playing. But the intimacy of that shot, you couldn't have shot it in Leland because he was reflecting way far away from where all that happened. But he had not forgotten it. And the students were just reverential. You could hear one student say, and that was a student, a young woman who was a graduate student in American Studies, a young Black woman who went on to be an endowed chair at William and Mary, and whose daughter recently graduated from Duke. I keep up with students, but those students were reverentially drawn to B.B. King, and Ray Lum came up, auctioned the Yale Bulldog on the green, and Bart Giamatti, whose son is a famous actor, sat out there with me, and Mr. Lum never stopped talking, never stopped auctioning. He was like a three-ring circus of voice. And Bart leaned over to me. He said, you know, I've heard Cleonth Brooks explain Faulkner repeatedly, but I never understood what Faulkner was doing with language until I heard this Mule Trader, because he brought it all alive. So you have those moments, and they're like pearls. And then when you have a film and you can insert it at a powerful moment, it's like a crescendo that's very quiet and just takes you by surprise.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I'll say one more thing, and then I want to open it up to the audience for questions, because I'm sure, you know, as we've gone through this conversation, things have come top of mind. So hopefully, if they're still top of mind, you'll share some of those thoughts with us. But thinking about the moment that you described, where they were, I don't have all the names right, but with the moment with the students and that musician, what I recognized even in that, and even in the moment with the young man in Parchman, as I looked at your films, and I think I said this to you last night, one of my takeaways, seeing life, everyday people life reflected back in that way, in the way that you captured it, I will go into my live music experiences, especially when I'm listening to the blues now, differently because of how your films influence and have impacted me and shifted my perspective, appreciation of the craft and where the story is truly rooted. You know, it's a pain. You know, it's pain, it's vulnerability, but it's also now an appreciation and a celebration for it being captured, and to have that understanding and deeper meaning will enrich my live experience now and really motivate me and give me this kind of desire to capture it, especially when it's done in a very authentic way. And so I don't know, that's where I kind of want to leave that moment, but I want to give you space to respond to that and then open it up to the audience.
Well, I just think when I was at Penn to talk about film, doing my PhD, I would come down, work for the summer in the Delta, and I'd come back with my tape recordings, photographs in a room about like this. And I'd put the photos on the wall and talk and play samples of the music. I thought, you know, they were interested. But I thought, I'm just not delivering the power of what I am trying to talk about. The only way I can really take them there in the deepest way without literally moving them is film. So I approached the Annenberg School and I tried to find filmmakers and students. Nobody was able to do it. So I got a little Super 8 camera and a tape recorder. And I went down and I shot little cassettes, 3 minutes of black and white, and you had to process that and then clip it together with a wild soundtrack on a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And when I showed that, they were jumping out of their seats. They could not believe it. And it was a quantum leap from the still photos, which are beautiful. And, you know, you put those on a wall and people respond, and listening to music is certainly powerful. But you put all that into the film, and with film, you can take the photographs, as Ken Burns mastered in the Civil War series. You can move the camera on the still photo and make those scenes incredibly powerful. But film is, you know, I think that's the consummate art of documentary work, which you know deeply because you've been in charge of that in Mississippi. And the other thing is, you have no great films without a great story. And Mississippi has given us so many storytellers in the form of writers and musicians and artists. And you look at John Grisham, every book he's done from A Time to Kill on, they're doing a film on it. And you look at the history of cinema, Gone with the Wind, Birth of a Nation, Driving Miss Daisy, Roots, the most widely watched series in the history of our nation was Alex Haley's Roots. And the South is the basic sort of hearth for the stories that are woven into films. And that has never stopped. The whole history of cinema, in many ways, is rooted in the American South, and both documentary films and feature films. And that continues today. It's just extraordinary. And Thabi, you and your team at the Film Commission have broadened and opened the doors to film and said, we will find locations, we'll provide support, and you've got the stories, like Raven Jackson's story. She wanted to come back to her mother's home state. And I know that you all set up all kind of things. And so I've seen in one example exactly how that happens. But film is it's the top rung of the ladder to me.
It's the thing that will transcend time, right? That it won't, it's the most tangible thing. as I think about, and I promise I'm not opening up for question. When I think about things that are lasting, I think, we'll go with that will last and continue to capture folk life, everyday people, our film, but also photography. So I don't, people talk about journalism and things that are lost, are endangered, that we're losing these ways of capturing stories. But I do think, to your point, film is one of those things that's not going anywhere. Photography is not going anywhere. So it's important, for all of us to continue to capture moments with those tools that we have, because technology makes it so easy to do. And now we have a path on how to keep it alive, that comes out of this conversation. So with that,
well, I'll just put a note on that. Speaking of photography, I mentioned Meridian's own, her roots are here, is Kate Medley, whose photography has been here in her book. You talk about just taking the picture on the run, and hers were not, but she stopped in filling stations. And what she finds is the best food, both the old meat and three and new foods, Asian foods, all sorts of Indian cuisine. In my hometown in Vicksburg, amazing Indian food by a young couple who are in, it's not a filling station, but it's an old mall that's been emptied out, and there's cheap available property to run a restaurant. But that's an example of how the Max is raising up and showcasing photography as well as film.
okay, we got any questions out in the audience? Yep.
Okay. Sorry to turn around, but this is more of a comment than a question. I worked with Bill on many of these films back in the mid-'70s in Memphis at the Center for Southern Folklore. And one of the things that he pioneered that he did not mention was the prevailing view in the day was to do a lot of voiceover on documentaries. And it provided sort of to me, kind of a barricade between the experience of the documentary and the authenticity, and having the scholarly voice describe things that were happening on screen or make comments. And Bill was adamant that we need to let these subjects speak for themselves and not intrude. Now, it's true, there's an energy exchange that happens with filmmakers and subjects, but it's an intuitive thing, and it's about trust. And what Bill revealed in his work is that it's much more enduring to have the subjects speak for themselves. Thank you, Bill.
When you look back on your journey, like all the small towns you've been through, Leland, everywhere else, all the faces you've seen, all the voices you've heard, what was the most inspiring moment for you? Like, what was the experience that it's like still sits with you today, that rises above the rest?
That's a good question. That's like asking you, which of your children do you love the most? I guess it's whichever person I was with at the moment, because I always felt blessed to be in the presence, because they would create, and you know what a good story will do. It makes you forget everything else. It's like when you're in a film. In theater, they call it the suspension of disbelief. If it's good drama or film, you're right in the midst of whatever the subject is. And no one appreciates that more than our dear friend Myrna Colley Lee, who set designs all sorts of theatrical. I want to recognize her because she is one of the great artists and creators of this. But when I look at the people I've worked with, they're all, I love them all. And there are moments, they come back to me frequently. You know, I hear their voices. Something will remind me of a phrase. Mr. Lum loved to he had phrases. And he said, you know, You live and learn, then you'll die and forget it all. And I use that as the title of one of my books on him. And I often think of it, you know, you're here for a short amount of time and you meet these living libraries. But when they're gone, whoop, it's all gone. It's just dust. But while they're alive, they create the world in which you are sitting in their living room or wherever, in a juke joint. They are in charge. They are God. They create reality. And you are there to capture a piece of it and carry it somewhere else. So all of them. I mean, I'm sorry I can't pinpoint one. I can list many. And, you know, but that's a great question because it's like your children. Every one of the people I've worked with, and my great regret is I never recorded my father. You know, I thought, well, he'll always be there, but he wasn't. And he's in the Ray Lum film briefly, talking about a trade that, but he traded with Ray Lum. He was a farmer from the time he was a young man, and he's the one who told me I should start filming and working with Ray Lum because I'd done all the blues work. He said, there'll never be another one like Mr. Lum. And he was right. I recorded him for 20 years, and I never got to the bottom of it. And I thought, I'll trick him. I'll get a telephone directory, and I would pick a name. I'd just say, Russell. Oh, Mr. John Russell, I sold him a mule once. And I would say, elephant. He said, we passed 2 elephants on the side of the road. They were making love, lying down. Said the circus just left them there because they didn't have time to wait. There was nothing. You could never trick him with he never was at a loss for words. And so, and then we made 2 films on Mr. Lum. The most recent one, the first one, Randy Robertson worked on, and he can cite all the lines in there. But the second one I did, we digitized, and the Petersons, Chris and Eric, who are here, helped us finish that film with my former students. So in that film, we have graphics, we have a composition of music, soundtrack, and we brought it back to Mississippi for a premiere at the 2 Mississippi museums and at his home in Vicksburg. And we invited the descendants of Mr. Lum, his great niece, who is a veterinarian in Fort Gibson, Betsy Lipscomb, and the descendants of his black hostler, Squire Harris, who traveled with him everywhere. Mr. Lum could buy and sell, auction, but he couldn't ride a horse. He was not a gifted rider. Squire could ride anything, no matter how wild. He could take a mule, he'd twist his ear and make him gentle because the mule was not, he knew how to handle. So his grandson came, who's in his 80s, and they both, after the film, told stories. And his grandson was a little shy, he wasn't talking too much, and someone said, tell him about the bull, tell him about the bull. So he says, well, they had this wild bull at the sale barn in Vicksburg, and they were trying to load him into a truck, and all the men were there pushing the bull, would run at him, and somebody said, get Squire. So they called Squire, Mr. Lum called him, and he said, what do you need? Mr. Lum said, I want you to put that bull in a truck. He said, get all those people out of that pen. So they got all the people out. He said, give me a croaker sack. That's an old cloth sack. So Squire went in there, and the bull looked at him. He shook the sack right in his face. The bull pulled back, and Squire was standing right in front of the thing that led into the truck, the ramp. the bull came charging, Squire threw the sack in the truck, and the bull went right in. So that's a moment I won't ever forget. But those are the worlds that are part of what this is all about. And it was great because the Humanities Council and the two museums sponsored all that. And we had packed out crowds, both in Jackson and Vicksburg, to see the film.
I think we have a question in the back.
Mr. Ferris, it is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Were you at the what is it? Bloody Sunday. Were you at Bloody Sunday?
Bloody Sunday?
Yes. When we were
No,
going
I was
across
not. No,
with John
I was-
Lewis and the people, you were not there. All right, but anyway, there are two pictures the world over. I've seen them in many places that are not even in America. The two pictures that you see there are John Lewis being beaten by these people, by the cops. And then there's a young man there who has white something on his face. And then the word vote is across his head. You know that. Everybody knows those two pictures. Now, what I've tried to do is because what most people don't know, even Meridianites, is that young man is from Meridian. And I was trying very hard to find out now who is this young man. And so we were looking at the funeral people, decided that they would try to see if we could trace who they were and all of that. So we do know that his last name is Calhoun Jr. I think it's James Calhoun Jr. But nobody seems to know where he is or what he's doing or anything about him. And like I said before, when we talk about the Bloody Sunday there going across that bridge, his picture is always right there with John Lewis's picture. So I'm asking, please, with your resources that you have, do you think that you could put the picture someplace and see if somebody knows who this is and where is the person living or is the person dead or anything about this particular young man?
That's a great question. I didn't pay her to ask that, but
That's a good question, yeah.
if you will give me your name and address, I'm going to send you an inscribed copy of a book I Am a Man. We were commissioned by a French museum of photography to do an exhibition of civil rights photography in the South in the decade of the 60s. Both of those photos are in there with identifications. And this brings us back to photography and the Black experience. And the whole civil rights movement was inspired by the photograph of the open casket of Emmett Till. The cover of this book is the photograph of the Memphis sanitation workers with I Am a Man signs. And in the introduction, Lonnie Bunch wrote a preface for it. He's the first Black secretary of the Smithsonian. He was the person who raised, I think it's over $500 million for the African American Museum on the Mall. And I talk about the power of photography. And there is the first photograph of this ex-slave with the scars of whipping on his back. That everybody knows that. That's an iconic photograph that speaks, as did that photograph of Dr. King, of John Lewis having his skull fractured by a white policeman, and of the young man with both on his face. All of those are powerful. And but in answer to your question, if he's from Meridian, I would bring that photograph in the newspaper and give it a background of this photograph and his name He's from Meridian. Do any of our readers, and put it out on the radio too, any of you know about his family or where he might be or they might be? People will step up and let you know. If he's from Meridian, there's somebody here that will remember him, especially if you have his name. And each of the photographs has an identification of the archive where we found it and all of the information they have. So that's a great question.
I think we have.
Well, right. Well, if the main thing is to make it visible, and somebody will say, well, that's so-and-so and his grandmother or his grandchild or whatever. You'll find out more about him in that way. And there are a number of projects. There is a project, we were just at the Action Fund, which I'm on the board of. It's now a $180 million fund that underwrites the renovation of historic Black homes and buildings, like the home of Madam C.J. Walker in New York, or Nina Simone in North Carolina. And I invited, Marcy and I were there, we invited a group from the Alabama Black Belt in the prairie, not too far from here, in Camden, Alabama. And there is an old shoe repair store that a Black man started, and his daughter, who's in her 80s, who marched in that march in tennis shoes, has made this shoe store a museum, and those tennis shoes are on the wall there. And her granddaughter came with her because she's going to take it over. And we're hoping that the Action Fund will help fund that. But one of my students from the University of North Carolina found a collection of photographs from the 1890s. There were a lot of quilts in it, so it was labeled G's Bend because a lot of quilt makers lived there. So she went to G's Bend and nobody knew anything about them. But the photographer was from Camden. So she went there to see if anyone there would recognize him and walked into this shoe museum and civil rights museum, and there were the photographs on the wall. So she began working with them, and they've set about learning the names and histories of everyone in every photograph. So that's a project that relates to your question, and I'll happily put you in touch with them. Oh, the name of the person, Marcy just found it on her phone, is Bobby Simmons, and it's in the Smithsonian. Well, we're going to connect you. We'll get to the bottom of this because once we have your information, we'll connect you.
That's wonderful.
No.
I know for a fact that people in my hometown, Meridian, send things to the Smithsonian that simply are not true. All right, so we have to go further than the Smithsonian. There's a lot of information in the Smithsonian about this particular that is not.
And I think we have time for
I think we have time for one more question. And then also I want to share that we have some of Bill's books available in the back afterward for signing. So we're going to do one more question, then I'm going to ask Thabi and Bill to wrap up.
Thank you so much. Yes, so you made the comment early on that when you started this, it was a passion project. You didn't know necessarily the direction you were headed in. I'm a history instructor at a community college here in Mississippi, and I have some similar aspirations. I've tried to record some local histories before it disappears, and I know you said this was a kind of a from the heart project for you, but just with hindsight and all of that, your work is obviously associated with the civil rights movement and blues music and things like that. For somebody starting out, what do you think the next big association will be for someone recording stories and trying to put history on paper before it disappears? With your hindsight now and seeing how your work has been interpreted over the years, you know, what do you think the next big category might be for someone, you know, going forward?
I just think it's a blank slate for me. I mean, if I were to say, go in and find the Delta Blues, as former student, saw my Blues from the Delta in San Francisco and the Clarksdale material in it. And she and her boyfriend said, let's move to Clarksdale and work on the blues. So they went there and they found the blues, but they also found hip hop music. And she ended up writing her thesis with me and publishing it through the University Press of Mississippi. That was music that was not there when I was there in the 60s. But so I think you just keep an open mind. But as a teacher, you also need to think about possibly harnessing your students, as the Foxfire Project did in Rabun Gap, Georgia. Elliot Wigginton taught high school, and his students started doing oral histories with their family about Appalachian ways, quilt making and all of the worlds that they were part of, storytelling. And they did a whole series of books. So that's one idea. Each year you have a different set of students that can be sent out to start collecting. And where is the town you're living?
I'm in Grenada.
Okay, well, Grenada will have, you know, a rich history there that you could begin to plumb in ways that, as a teacher, you can work through your students, or you can simply work on your own.
I've actually started categorizing some of my students' family history, some civil rights movement in town, because that's something. Growing up in Grenada, I was told, oh, well, you know, yeah, Dr. King's name and stuff like that. It's really pretty small here. You know, you can even find even how big it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yep.
Of everyday people.
Yep.
Like I think about the Dachshunds women,
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Dachshund, and when she's cutting up the peaches,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like you said, Tubby, that he stays on it.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't like dip that. He doesn't go past her domestic work.
And I want to add something to that, to this point, and I know, you know, Ben, we're at time, but I think something that comes up for me when you ask that question, and when I think about your work and how you recognize that moment, what I wrote down is, ask yourself, what do I have authentic, organic access to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when it deals with everyday life, and am I capturing that, right? And so that's kind of where I want to, you know, rest the conversation, you know, allow you to speak and respond to that, but then, you know, give space for, you know, us to think about and process the entire conversation as we've had it, and capture whatever you're thinking, you know, right after you walk out of this. How have you, you know, what have you observed? You know, how are you feeling emotionally? What does that mean, and how does that connect to whatever the universal theme of it all is, right?
Well, I think everyday life is what it's about. I mean, you go out with giant theories. I'm going to capture the civil rights movement. I'm going to capture whatever. But people are interested in the specific the French call it la vie quotidienne, the everyday life, and that is universal. A lady peeling peaches to make either peach dessert or pickle them, that happens all over the world. And you create a beautiful portrait in various ways in Grenada, and everybody is going to understand that. It's a universal language, and the heart is too. You know, losing your wife, your first wife, you know, it broke his heart. Well, how many hearts have been broken? There's hardly a person in the world that hasn't felt that. So the everyday life is the most powerful of all. Now, I want to thank all of you for coming, and especially you, Thabi. I will see you shortly.
Very
in
soon.
Jackson.
2 weeks.
And I also want to welcome and thank John Jennings, who is seated here in the front row. John is an award-winning graphic artist, a curator, a scholar of Afrofuturism. This is a new, exciting field, comics, graphic novels, and his roots are in Flora, Mississippi. And he's an alumnus and a former professor at Jackson State University, now teaching at the University of North Carolina at Riverside.
California.
And Riverside, California.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry. And he's got an exhibition coming up here at the Max in 2026. And his family roots are just a stone's throw from where I grew up in Hermanville, Mississippi, near Port Gibson. Welcome home, John. We're honored to have you. And last but not least, I want to recognize again our beloved friend, Myrna Collins Lee.
Yes.
She is the doyen of the arts in Mississippi and the nation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
To learn more and support the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience, go to msarts.org.